Welcome to Truth and Justice League podcast. I'm here with Denise Castro. I'm Mark Mueller. Did I say that already?
I think so.
Anyway, I can't remember.
I don't remember either.
Well, I'm Mark Mueller. I'm Mark Mueller. This is Truth and Justice League podcast. We are in a little series called, what you might call Stories from the Vault, crazy stories, trials, and cases. Denise, what would you like to hear about today?
I remember hearing something about there was a time you helped Blackfoot. I want to
Sure.
hear about that.
That's the Badger 2 medicine case in Montana. Wild case was in the 90s. And every once in a while, Denise says, I get the way crazy case that's just not in the norm of, it's not a car accident, it's not malpractice, it's not a product's liability, it's just something really interesting and out there and provocative, whatever it is. So we've had the condom rape case, the Lakota chief headdress being seized, the guy who died in a bar fight that they wanted to preserve his sperm and there was no will, no court order. These things happen to us. We just seem to get pulled into sort of history from time to time. So this one, what we call the Badger 2 medicine case or the Blackfoot case, was the start of this was very a classic for one of my weird kind of cases. I was in a kind of a hippie yoga personal growth retreat in Montana, outside of Helena, Montana, called the Feathered Pipe Ranch. I was just getting some Montana wilderness and hiking, and it was a great, beautiful place to go. They used it for those kind of things. I wasn't there for a yoga retreat or anything like that. I don't think I'd even done yoga back in those days. But it's a beautiful natural setting in the mountains, and I'm in this big, wooden hot tub that's in a cabin, and it's a communal hot tub. It's like big and rustic, and there were a couple of people in there, and then this one guy named Ron West. I didn't know him, and he started talking to me. And Ron was an interesting long-term Montana guy, was a Vietnam vet, had a disability from exposure to toxic jet fuel that was spilled on him. So he had a little bit of what I think was probably like a Parkinson's kind of condition, but he was extremely intelligent, but he did have a little shakiness that would occur. Anyway, so I'm in the hot tub with Ron, and we're just talking about life and what have you, and he said, well, how much do you know about the Blackfoot Indians? And I didn't know much at all. He said, how much do you know? Do you know anything about the big dispute that's going on up here in Montana with the oil companies wanting to drill for oil and gas on the national wilderness land? And I said, I don't know anything about it. So he starts telling me this story, that he's friends with these Blackfoot guys up in the Browning, Montana area, up near the Canadian border. And he's friends with a guy named Floyd Tiny Man Heavy Runner, who was the chief of the traditional route of the traditional branch of the Blackfoot called the Brave Dog Society. So these were guys that were like a warrior society, and they were also medicine men kind of thing. But they're like the traditional ones that hold on to the beliefs and defend the tribe and all this kind of stuff. Back in the day, they still go out there and do riding horses and doing stuff like that. And this Floyd was long black hair and just like looked like the TV classic, that you would see in the movies, the bold, Indian leader of his troops and all this kind of stuff. That's what he looked like. And anyway, so Ron was telling me about Chief Floyd Heavy Runner, and he said, well, he said this land was leased to the oil companies to use to do exploration for. And before this lease was allowed to proceed, this is under the this is under the the Forest Service and Department of the Interior control in Washington. And before they can do something like mining or oil on public land, this is public land. They have to do an environmental impact statement and also get information from neighbors and people like that to see whether this is something that should be done.
Mm-hmm.
And so the land was beautiful, like Montana, green trees and pine trees and rivers running through it, and had natural populations of wolves and grizzly bears and moose and elk and all. I mean, it was like amazing, right? And so of course, drilling for oil and gas is not going to be like a very nice thing to do there. It's loud, it's obstructive, it's nasty, there's going to be pollution. So they did, the process is that when the government wants to do something like that, they have to have time for people to have meetings and report and complain and do environmental impact statements. All of those had already been done. We were past deadlines for everything. So there was like no way to do anything legally that would make a difference. Because if you say, for example, you've heard about people suing to stop some development because it's going to hurt, a local population of endangered species or something like that. Well, before you get there to suing somebody, you have to have this administrative hearings, okay, and do evaluations first. So if they were going to do it in Austin and somebody wanted to do something with Barton Springs, they would have to study it, right, to see whether or not this building stuff would have impact on endangered species or the quality of the environment, what have you.
Would that also allow the community to protest it or like
Right. So the community can
complain about it, I guess?
Right. The community can complain,
Mm-hmm.
and they have some power. Depends on who they're really dealing with, But yeah, let's people for and against, and also a environmental impact statement and all that other kind of stuff. So all those things had already been done.
So the train is going.
The train has
Yeah,
left.
it's
The
left
train
the
has
station.
left the station.
Yeah.
The train has left the station.
It's in progress. It's going to happen.
It's going to happen because none of this stuff was. Nobody filed a complaint on behalf of the traditional Blackfoot, and all the environmental impact statements came back. We can do this with minimal impact.
Yeah, right.
So you've heard this stories before, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so Ron goes to me and he goes, well, what do you think about helping us try to figure out what we can do about this? And I'm like, wow, this is interesting. And he said, now, also, I got to tell you, the Blackfoot, these Brave Dog guys, they're great guys, but they have zero money. And you're going to be dealing with the federal government and Chevron and FINA oil companies.
That have godlike money.
Yeah. So that's who you're going to be dealing with. So are you interested? Well, how can I resist something as crazy as that, going against the federal government and Chevron and FINA, when you can't even sue them? You're going to have to find some other way to stop this without getting imprisoned, without killing anybody. So it's a challenge, right? So,
Yeah.
So I, of course, said, yeah, I'm in.
Of course.
Of course. And so that led to me becoming the lawyer for the Blackfoot Indians. Now, I was a licensed lawyer in Montana by that time. I don't know if that made a difference in this case because we never filed any legal papers. But I had to meet with my tribal guys and gain their trust. 'Cause, I'm the white boy and the gringo, and this is a spiritual mission for them. This is a big time deal. And so I went with them up to their territory, and we did like a whole series of things. And I'm just going to say it on the record. This is what we did, and it was a very powerful thing. We did an intense sweat lodge, which, if you don't know what that is, it's basically a tent that has there's a fire in it, and they stoke the fire up really hot, and then douse the rocks brought us these big hot rocks with water, and it makes it really hot. And these guys were hardcore. These guys, and they do rounds and rounds and rounds of spilling the hot water on the hot rocks, and it gets so hot in there that you feel like your skin is going to burn off. I know you know about this because we did this in British Columbia.
You literally feel like you're gonna die. Your skin is melting off,
and your skin's melting off. And so and these guys were even more fierce. Okay, and so it was getting hotter and hotter. And the last thing you're gonna do is like be the first one to duck out of this,
right?
Because you are not gonna wussy out with these kind of guys. It just isn't gonna. It just aren't gonna do it. Mm-hmm. And so I remember though, but I remember at one point kind of leaning down to the ground, trying to get right on the ground and try to breathe some kind of like cooler air that might be drifting through the bottom of the tent, right? The teepee, right? You know this feeling, Denise? Okay, right? I've been there. Yeah, you've been there. You know what I'm talking about, because you think you're gonna die. Literally. Anything to get the temperature down just a tiny bit, right? And so that was that process. So we did rounds and rounds and rounds of this, and then after that we went outside when you're just like roasted, and we basically scrubbed off with snow. That was pretty wild. If you were brave enough, and I don't remember if I did this or not, you rolled in the snow, but we definitely put snow all over our bodies to scrub it down with, and you could see the steam rising because you were so hot and the snow was so cold. So one of the things we did was the sweat lodge, and then we also did a ceremony. Prayers. These are a lot of prayers with all these things. Prayers for great help from Great Spirit to help save the plants and the animals and the nature and the humans, and very, very, very spiritual indigenous approach to things. And so we ended up we had to eat raw elk liver, okay, to get the power of the elk to help us with our battle that was coming up. And I can tell you that was one of the nastiest things I've ever eaten in my entire life. And I've eaten a lot of nasty things, and but that was, and I'm pretty stout about that, but this was just amazing to get this elk liver very raw. Okay. And again, you're not going to pass. No, I'm going to save it for the mashed potatoes. No, you're eating the raw elk liver. So we did that.
Yeah, you have to.
Got to do it.
Once again, you can't duck out.
White boy can't duck out, right? White boy can't duck out.
No, if anything, they're probably doing it on purpose.
Yeah.
To test you.
So the other thing we did up there, so this was called the Badger 2 Medicine area. And so the significance of that was that there is Big Badger and Little Badger. And there was a Big Badger, I think a Big Badger River and a Little Badger River. Big Badger is actually grizzly. Little Badger is the badger that we know, the little animal that's fierce but relatively small.
Feisty guy.
So in their language, in the Blackfoot language, however that translates into badger, this land was the Badger 2 Medicine because it had both badgers and grizzly bears there. And those were revered as a power source, power animals, in that territory. So we went, we visited all the old guys. If you've ever seen these movies like Thunderheart or, the old Indian guys are sitting in there smoking a cigarette, have been around for 90 years, all gnarled up, right? Those guys, we had to go talk to some of those guys to go get, that part of the blessing from history too, right? And they were always, it seemed like they were always like living in a little trailer or shack, and always had a TV on someplace. But they were like, you could tell they were the real deal. And, and the younger chiefs and stuff would consult, and they would listen to what they had to say. And they would have like feathers and rattles and tobacco and blow smoke on you and things like that, right? That was part of the whole thing. So, so we were at the one of the other things that we had to do to kind of prove you're in this was we had to go basically jump off this big rock into this pool of water. I think it was the Little Badger River, and it was cold water in Montana. I mean, we had to go climb up on this thing. You were cold just climbing up on the rock. And then, jumping in, another one, right? Like jumping in, it was like, I don't know, 20, 30 feet down. It was a long jump, right? Into the cold water. So once you jump, there was no going back. And it was cold. I cringe now just thinking about how cold that was. But that's the kind of stuff that we did. And then we gathered with there were local environmentalists and local natural people from hippies and stuff from Montana and all kinds of people and students at University of Montana, and I think some from Montana State, the different schools there, but we were definitely in Missoula, which is where the University of Montana is. And we would roust the public, made friends with newspaper reporters. I had my friend Kevin Carmody from Texas would come up with me and write a story on it, and it would get in legal publications, and then it would get picked up by the New York Times, and all these people. The story of this underdog battle, pictures of the chief with his long hair, and me with my what they described as an amulet around my neck. I don't know. I had some kind of thing around my neck that had pouch, some stuff in there, and so we would go to. I remember having basically a semi riot. It was nonviolent, but it was a protest at the courthouse steps in Missoula, and we were talking about the need to maintain the purity of the land and the water and protect the animals, and that this was a power play by the corporations, and we couldn't tolerate it, could we? Right? So we were fired up. We fired up all those students and all those activists and all those old hippies. We were fired up, and of course the newspapers and the magazines and the TV loved that story, right? Because you got very colorful people here. You got this Texas guy with long hair and lightning bolt earring, and you got this and a cowboy hat and boots, and you got this chief who's like not as nearly as tall, but long black hair, and coming in like he should be shooting a gun or carrying a spear, and so we were in the press a lot, and so that stirred things up, and then I got a meeting with the Forest Service guy. And I think his name was Dale Gorman. This is weird coming back to me, okay? Nice enough guy. A lot of people that work for the Forest Service, the Park Service, are nice people. They really do care, and they're not bad people. And so, but he's in a pickle because now he's gone along with signing off on the approval for this stuff, and now we're causing a holy ruckus. And he's really not that bad a guy, but he didn't know who we were before. And so we stirred this up. Our point was, wait a minute, you should have your environmental impact statement, and all the stuff that you did was incomplete and grossly inadequate because you did not seek out and consider the opinions of the traditional users of that land, which is the Blackfoot, and their sacred use of the land. You should have done that because some rights to this land, which used to be their land, and they sold it to the government with reservations for traditional use. And we said the traditional use includes traditional spiritual use, which means you can't mess with this land. So that was what we were saying. So you were saying this whole process is invalid, and this would be like drilling for oil in the middle of the Vatican. Right in the middle, right? If you were Catholic, that's what it'd be like. So this is just can't do it, right? And so this stirs everything up, right? And it was like more press, Indian sacred sites say, leave us alone. It was a Sundance site back in the day that they did their big dances and their ceremonies. And so we're stirring it up, but we're still we are talking about talking about mice fighting gorillas, right? This is about as much of a Goliath and David story as you can get. And literally every time it would seem like they were about to start going ahead and drilling, something would happen in the press, something would happen someplace, and 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 it would get postponed. So like it was like there was somebody watching over us in this in some way, but we never could take that for granted because it was scary. Like, my God, what if we lose? Right? That's terrible because you never know what to do in this situation. It's not like there's a book that tells you this is what you do, this is how you file your case. This is the kind of steps you can take. There wasn't. So we ended up going to my friend Kevin Carmody was the president of the it was an environmental reporters group international, and he was like my friend from like right after law school. He was uncovering my first stories in Orange, Texas, and Beaumont. If we've gotten that far, right? This was my friend Kevin, and so Kevin got me invited. He was also doing some of the stories himself. And so he was definitely an ally. He was not neutral, right? He was on our side all the way. It was awesome. But he wrote really good stories. They were true stories. So he got us invited to the International Society of Environmental Journalists meeting in Berlin. And so there we are in Berlin, Germany. Me, Floyd, heavy runner. And I don't even know if he had a passport, but, he was like, my face is my passport, kind of thing. But somehow we got there, and we're in Berlin. And both of us gave speeches in Berlin to this big audience of mostly European environmental writers and environmental advocates and things like this. And we deliberately picked this because Chevron and FINA both had bases in Europe. I think it was the Netherlands at the time, but they were over there. And so we were there. The press in Germany and in Europe was much better even than the U.S. press. They were like, the U.S. is attempting to use their imperialist, power on native culture and, things like that. And it was like, dude, all of a sudden it got Germans and Swiss and Brits and all these people were rising up on behalf of my Blackfoot, right? It was awesome. And they were protesting outside Chevron and FINA's headquarters and stuff like this. I wasn't even there, but people were protesting with signs, don't trash, the sacred sites and stuff like this.
Love that.
Give up your leases. It was like that kind of thing. And so that case was 9 years of ebbs and flows, newspaper stuff, meetings with the Forest Service, and I'll tell you one part before I finish that is that I met with the Forest Service guy, and he was asking me, he was really wanting to understand how he could work a compromise here, and so he's also trying to understand what our real issue and claim was, other than it's going to pollute or make noise. And so here was the pickle I was in. Okay, this is one white guy talking to another white guy. And he said, well, can you help me, Mr. Mueller, understand the Blackfoot, sensibilities and claims here so that I can try to accommodate them? And I said, well, I'm a little handicapped because I'm a white boy. And I can't know all the internal secrets and spiritual ways of the Blackfoot. They're not allowed to share it with me. Okay, at that time. Okay, so I said, so number one, I don't know it all. I can't be told it all. So that's the first level of it. But it was explained to me in this way that might translate into white man's language. Chief Floyd Heavy Runner said, with spirit, it is indivisible. All land is sacred. All water is sacred. Those are living beings. Okay, and so that you can't just go in and put a pipe in part of it because that disrupts the whole. It's not just like there's a pipe over here and it's 6 feet away from something else. But then he got very graphic with me. He gave me an example. For example, if the medicine man takes a shit in the forest, that shit and where it falls is sacred. So that's the story, part of the story that I gave to the forest guy, right? Forest Service guy. So that was that conversation, and we ended up politely, it was not, I wasn't being disrespectful.
Right.
It was like that kind of conversation. And really, that was an era in which there were actually some pretty solid people in some of those departments. That's a concern I have now, in this day and age. Will we have people that will protect the earth in the government? And that's a big question, because once you tear it up, you can't get it back. We were talking about, like, they get this. They were saying, well, we could, if the pipes, if trucking in pipes is too disruptive because we have to dig roads. It's roadless land. It was pristine roadless land. If digging up roads will be too disruptive, we can helicopter in the pipes. Now, if you've ever heard helicopters and the loud noises they make, if you can imagine helicopters going day and night to try to bring pipes in and then dropping them off and having them clang, right? That's not going to work.
Right.
And then if you have pipes, even if you got it done and put in that way, pipes, some of the animals won't cross the pipes. Like, they just won't. Like, and I was like, I don't know if it's the elks or which animals, but they just, it's not supposed to be here. Not crossing it, right? So we raised all of these issues, right? About, like, how nature is not to be messed with and needed to be preserved. Eventually, after 9 years of no money, nobody has any time, and working with the traditional culture, which is tricky, because it's like it's not without its drama. It's not without its own ways of being. Okay. People talk differently. They have different ways of doing what they're doing. And the traditional people were different than the city council, because the official business people there can be pretty corrupt. Okay, I don't know what it's like now, but it can be pretty corrupt. So they're about who's paying me money, and I'll approve of it at that point, right? Well, if you're dealing with the chief and these traditional guys, they don't want to have anything to do with the government, whether it's their government or the federal government. They don't want it. That, to them, that's man-made rules. That's not God-made rules. So after 9 years of basically going by the seat of our pants, Chevron and FINA announced they were both giving up their leases.
What?
There you go.
Great story.
Good story.
Good story.